100 Trek and the 100 year the Anzacs were 100% success. So the most important thing to me, I guess, was the 100% success as well, because everybody that's walked the track with me over the last 22 years, basically have all finished it, which is a good thing, it's a good record. I look back over the years as well, and I remember the first time that I went up the Kokoda Track. 22 years ago, a lot of people didn't know what the Kokoda Track was. Some people call it the Dakota Track. Some people called it the Coca-Cola Track. That's how bad it was. And it was something that really rang a bell with me, because coming from Ireland, we knew our history. And most importantly, we knew what we stood for, we knew where we came from. And it frustrated the living daylights out of me that people didn't know their history. So I found myself up in this little village up in the Owen Stanley Mountains, and we all know it's called Kokoda now, of course. And I'll never forget it, when I landed there, I used to sit back and watch everybody. They'd arrive. There was a prominent operator from Australia at the time, and he'd get off the plane and he'd turn around and he'd say to the elders that would come up and greet you, he'd say, "Oh mate, you need to get this, and you need to have this in your village, and you need this as well, etc., etc." And I never fell into that. I looked back and I sat back and I watched, and when it was my turn, I remember the elder came up to me and he started talking to me, and I just turned around to him and I asked a simple question. I said, "You know what do you need?" And the elder turned around to me and he said, "Well, we don't need anything. We actually don't need anything. We actually live here where we plant a vegetable. As long as it rains, that vegetable grows. As long as it grows, we got food and we're all happy." And it was probably one of the greatest learnings that I've ever had. And it was one that stood to me for many, many years, you know. I often saw people go up there and they dictate their ways, they try and change the ways of the people on the land as well, and how they did things. One of the greatest things for me was how they supported each other. And that was, well, you know, the older people who were no longer strong enough to work in the fields, they would spend all day with the young kids who were too young to do anything, too young to access school because they didn't have any of those days. And then those who were strong would go off into the fields and they'd become farmers, and they'd actually, you know, they'd sow crops and they'd have a food source. But the elderly people, they would spend all day teaching the young people the way, their culture. That's one of the reasons why that culture is so strong today. And I thought this was the coolest thing, you know, because at the time I was studying the history of Kokoda, not just Kokoda, but elsewhere as well, and the role in the Pacific of the ADF, etc., and what we actually did up there in 1942 and all the way through to 45. And I took in Shaggy Ridge, and I also took in the Black Cat Track area as well, and we specialised in that and Weewak and, you know, other areas. But sitting back watching this, I thought this was the greatest thing, because one of the greatest things from the history of the Kokoda Track, one of the elements, the key elements, was mateship. And we all know we've got those 4 pillars up there in the Sarava, and to me that pretty much symbolises what Australia stands for. And at the time, the local people were displaying this as well. And so I got to know them and I got to understand them really well. And I think they also knew that I was different as well. I remember one day, you know, speaking with an Irish accent, of course, they worked out that, well, I had some sort of difference about me as well. And that's why I recognised the wooden spoon. But it was interesting because one day the locals tried to work out where I was from, because they knew I wasn't Australian, I didn't have an Australian accent. And they went around their little enclaves, you know, the little villages, they'd sit around and they'd look at you, and they were brilliant at doing what I would learn later would become similar to a Myers-Briggs test. We spend all this money in our society for all these different psychological tests, where the people on the ground in Papua New Guinea are brilliant at assessing people. They work it out like that, because it's all built around survival. And so they work it out, you know, and where's he from, yeah, and they asked me eventually, and I said, well, I'm from a country called Ireland. You know, it's a little island, it's very near a place called England. And no lights went on. Then all of a sudden, a little fella down the back, you know, the light went on for him, and he says, "Ah, I know, no one Andruku." And I went, right, that's close enough, because no one Andruku comes from the island, so, and no one Andruku is as black as the ace of spades. He plays rugby league for Fiji, right? And I said, well, that's close enough, yeah, that's where I come from. And so from there on in, we had this great relationship, we understood each other. And so we continued to grow, and we continued to walk the history. And we started to get out there more into schools, we started doing presentations, and one of the hardest things I had at the time was the lack of integrity that existed around this whole thing called history. And it was more or less because people were telling their story, and they were putting a slant on it, and they were manipulating it, and they were using it, and they were maneuvering it in here and there and everywhere. And then there was all these different so-called people that were supposedly doing all this great work on the Kokoda Track and elsewhere in Papua New Guinea. And what used to frustrate me was when I went out there and actually walked into these areas and I talked to the people who supposedly helped. And then the feedback was, well, we've never seen that person, or we've never heard of that, we've never had that, no, we've never seen that. And it used to get me very, very angry at the time. And I had a great man around that time as well, and that was Stan Gloria. And I could talk to Stan about it, and Stan realised, he understood it as well, and he also, being an intelligence officer, of course, he had a fair understanding of who people were. And so, one of the hardest things, one of the greatest things as well at the same time, one of the greatest learnings for me was to be able to stay with integrity, the most important part being the history. Making sure that the history wasn't bastardised, making sure that the history was true to the actual lay of the land, and making sure that it was true today as it was yesterday. And that was actually quite hard because a lot of people write books in those days, of course, you know, and all those books have changed since, which tells me that, well, perhaps the research wasn't done as thoroughly as probably what could have been done. There's a lot of reasons for that, of course, as well. But as we continue to grow and as we continue to spend more and more time with the diggers, and particularly with reunions like this one here, especially with the 2nd 14th Battalion, who I hold close to me, we started to get a fair understanding of what it was like from your point of view, i.e. the diggers, and what it was like to be up there. And so we continue to tell a story, we continue to bring it to life as well, and we continue to put a human spin to it. And over the years, you know, 106 tracks, yeah, tell me about that, Aidan. Well, 106 tracks means I had exposure to a lot of people that came from a lot of different walks of life, not just from Australia, but England as well. And every now and again you get an Irish guy too turn up, and that was really confusing. But when you get two of them on the track at the same time, the locals haven't got a chance. But, and I think that's the reason why we've gone so well. But most importantly, with this kind of thing, with the history in particular, as we proceeded with it, we started to get it out there and see these people coming in search of it, and they still do today, of course. They came from all walks of life. I remember one case, a young lad. He was an interesting kid, you know, and nobody wanted anything to do with him. He didn't speak a lot, you know, he wasn't fitting in with a group, and he was kind of, I guess he was a delinquent. Police had called me and said, look, Aidan, he's 15 years of age. And I think if you don't sort him out, you don't take him up to Kokoda Track and teach him a few Australian values, well, he's not going to make it. He's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. And I said, all right, no worries. So I went out for a walk with this kid, you know, 15 years of age. And I got to know him, and I realised and worked out pretty quickly where his issues were. And so I turned around to the organiser of this group and I said, look, I'm going to take this kid up the track whether you like it or not. I know you object to it, and I know you don't like it, but he's going to come at me. And the organiser said, well, no, Aidan, he doesn't fit in. Nobody likes him, he's disrespectful to us, he won't even answer us, you know. So I said, well, all the more reason why I want him. So I insisted, stood my ground, and anyway the kid landed in Kokoda with me. And he wasn't a cool kid, he was ostracised by the group that he was with. You know, in Australia and other countries as well, we tend to not spend too much time with people who are a little bit different, a little bit outside the square, have to invest energy in them, don't want to do that. So I watched him, you know, and over a period of time, he started fitting in more so with the local people. And he turned around to me one day and he says, Aidan, do you mind if I sleep around the fire with the boys at night time? That's what they do. I said, well, as long as you're not upsetting them and they're okay with it. And I'd already briefed them, you know. See, up there, the most important thing up there is their currency is not about what religion you are. Their currency is certainly not about your colour skin. Currency is certainly not about money. Their currency is simply about survival. Mateship, you know, you need love and you need shelter and you need warmth, you need food. It's very basics. Peel the layers of the onion back to nothing. And so I watched this kid, you know, suddenly he was sleeping around a fire with the boys. The boys had welcomed him into a tribe. And so over a period of a few days, he then started to grow. They gave him a job. You know, your job now is to go down and get the water for everybody. That's a really big job to have. It's very important. Without water, we die. And then he would do that. But what it taught him then was, it taught him that he had a value. And more importantly, he was recognised for bringing the water in. So he actually had recognition too. And so the kid grew. I was watching this, you know, and suddenly he had found a tribe that welcomed him. A tribe that didn't find him any different to them because they didn't judge him. And so, as we continued to walk the track, we got up to Kokoda Track. And at Kokoda Track, even today, I still sing Danny Boy out of respect for Stan and his family. And sometimes that goes a little bit wobbly, but I do it. So I'm singing Danny Boy, you know. And when I'd finished, I turned around to the kids, you know, and I said, hey, look, is there anybody here that wants to say anything? You know what kids are like, they put their head down and go, don't pick me, don't pick me. Anyway, out of nowhere, this little kid, 15 years of age, he jumped up on Kokoda Track and he started belting out, ain't no mountain high enough. And he's letting rip. like Michael Ralston on a Friday night. And he was just letting rip, you know, and we're all going, geez, what's going on here? I've never seen this before. How did that happen, you know? And when he had finished, we all looked at the ground, and he got off, and off he trudged with the local boys, you know. And so what he did was, he now had a value. Well, more importantly, the other group, they decided, well, hang on a minute, his value, we want him back in our group, he's actually cool. So they spent the next few days trying to pull him back into their group. But because he knew now he had a value, he turned around and said, well, I'm not going back to that group. I know where I belong. I'm happy here. I've got a value. I've got recognition, blah, blah, blah. And I went on like that for a few days. But that kid grew in stature, and he grew in strength, and he heard the history, and he walked in the footsteps of those who'd gone before, and he walked in the footsteps of where it happened, you know, and he knew it. And he took it on board, and he'd go ahead and he'd drop his bag off the top of the hill like Stan Bissett used to do, and walk all the way back down the hill, and he'd pick a bag from one of the kids that was struggling, and he'd do the same, put it up there on top of the hill. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen, you know. He developed strength and power and everything that goes with it. When we finished the track anyway, you know, we flew back into Brisbane, and I snuck out the back way because all the parents were there to meet him, you know, and it was their day. Anyway, so I'm on the way home to Gold Coast and driving home, and his mother rings me. She says, Aidan, what happened up there? I've never seen such a change in the kid. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, once he came through customs in Brisbane Airport, he turned around, he ran up to me, he put his arms around me, and he said, I love you, Mum. I said, well, stay tuned. She said, I've never heard that before. He's never said that to me. He's 15 years of age, he's never said it to me. And I said, well, stay tuned, you know. He's learned. The diggers who've gone before, the legacy that they've created, he's walked in their footsteps, he's got it, and he's learned. He's got what those soldiers were doing. He's got what this whole thing is about. It's not a walk in the park. A week later, she rang me and she said, Aidan, you know what he's done? And I said, I'm not surprised, tell me. Well, what he's done is he's drawn up a list of all his loser mates, and he's rang them all one by one and said, you know what? I don't want anything to do with you anymore. You're a loser. You're a loser. You're a loser. You're a loser. And he flicked them all. And then he went out. He got a job with the help from us. And what they didn't realise at the time was this kid was autistic. He was autistic, and he had never been assessed. Nobody had given him the time of day. All I could see was push him over here. He's different. He's going to be a problem. He is a problem, and he's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. But him going up on the Kokoda Track and listening to the history of the diggers and following in the footsteps of their legacy changed his whole life. All because he suddenly got what the whole thing was about. I could quote another 100 cases very, very similar to that one. And I could quote, and I see it all the time on the Kokoda Track, or what the track's about, in regards to people going up there, people who've been through all sorts of different atrocities, people who, you know, who've lost their sons in the line of duty. Every Anzac Day we take the New South Wales Police up on the Kokoda Track. We've been doing that. They keep coming back. They keep coming back. It's 11 years now doing it with them. And, you know, many times at Israel, at the Battle of Israel, I've seen it so many times. I've got a father, you know, he puts his arms around me, and he'll be there for 30 minutes crying his eyes out because his young son, a police officer, was killed in the line of duty. What do you say to a man who cries for half an hour with his hands wrapped around you, you know? What do you say to him? There's nothing you can say. You just got to go with it. It's one of the worst things. But what it does is they hear the emotion of the battle sites up there, and they hear the reality of what actually happened. And most importantly, one of the hardest things and one of the greatest things it does for them is that they realise that no matter how hard they think they have life here in Australia, it could have been 50 million times worse if it wasn't for what these lads did in 1942. And it could be a lot worse if you get shot at. It's very simple. And they understand that and they get it. And it works across the whole of the population. Whether it's a young kid, whether it's a student, whether it's a grown adult, whether it's somebody who's gone through hardships, you know, they think they have a heart, they don't. And reality kicks in. And I see it all the time. By the time they get to Oris Corner, the changes in them. The way the Australian flag comes out, and the way they're so proud and they're so appreciative of what the diggers did in 1942. The fact is, so many of them never made it home. When we take them up at Bamana Cemetery, and I stand there at Bamana Cemetery and recite some of the history of some of the diggers, you know. And we often put puppies on every single one of the battalion, 2nd 14, for example. When we walk the track nowadays, of course, I bring photographs of the 2nd 14 in particular, and we go on to 39 for us. And what we do is, when I'm presenting the history, at each battle site, I'll place the soldiers, the photographs of those who never made it back home. And they're on the ground. And the reality is that people see it. for the freedoms that you have here in Australia. Somebody paid that price. We should never forget that. And they see that. Nowadays we use a little screen where we now screen movies up on the track. And it's one of the most amazing things. We see young diggers, E Company 39, waving as they walk across the track, excited. And there they are, it's all alive on the track now. We bring the soldiers back alive. And it really brings it home to people. People see it, they say this thing is real. You can feel it, you can touch it, you can smell it. It's real. And the feedback that we constantly get from people, it always veers around the one word: why isn't this being taught in schools? Why is it that we're not getting educated around this stuff in schools? And that question goes every single time. Why is it that your level of education, Aidan, around the history, around the humanity of it as well, why isn't that being taught in schools? Why isn't it that we hear this from teachers, you know? And it's a question I still can't answer, because I've had politicians and they ask the same questions, you know? And it's very frustrating, it is, you know? So the problem for me, the problem for where I come from, around the integrity of the histories, is that what it's allowed happen is it's allowed people to come into these situations whereby they can bastardise your history because nobody knows it. And so as a result, you've got people presenting a form of history that would blow your mind. I spoke to Trevor and a few of the guys here earlier, and I saw one recently, a prominent school from Melbourne, sitting up on Brigade Hill. And Brigade Hill, as you all know, is sacred ground, more or less money. And a teacher sat with his students, and he sat there and he said, well, this is what happened. You had a dude down here, he fixed the bayonet. You had a dude down here, and he fixed another bayonet. And somewhere in between, the Japs got a machine gun up here, he started the fire. So this dude wasn't happy, this dude wasn't happy, and they came together. You know? And that's what you deal with. You don't know your history. And this is why what the track stands for and how it's operated, etc., is important. A few years ago, that frustration led me to create what was called the Code of Ethics for Kokoda Track operators. And it meant that finally we had some standards around the local people paying them the right money, making sure they're not carrying heavy bags. Carrying heavy bags, a prominent Australian operator who was up there, and I sat down with one of these young lads one day, he's crying his eyes out on the track. And he was carrying a 60-kilogram bag. And when I looked inside the bag, it was pretty much full of beer. You believe that? So this kid was crying, and I said, look, this is bullshit, you know. And he said, I can't complain because if I do, I'll lose the job. So we kickstarted the Code of Ethics. And so now the bag weights are all limited. Minimum, you know, it's all back down to less than 20 kilos, you know. It's got to be 18 kilos. So it's realistic. They're entitled to a certain amount of money. They're entitled to certain living rights as well. You don't have to be feral. You don't have to sleep out in the open anymore. You know, it's appreciative. It goes on and on and on. So those standards were put in place, and it was all through sheer frustration. And a lot of trekking companies got on side with it, of course, and they jumped through the hoops, and it was all good. And then again, we had a situation that arose with Isarava. So Isarava, if you went up there now, you'd see a fence. The fence is off Isarava. Very disappointing. And the landowner was frustrated because he was never given the opportunity to tender, to cut his own grass. You believe that? Didn't get the opportunity to tender his own grass. When I spoke to the bureaucrat that was involved in this, his reply was, oh well, we put a tender out in the newspaper. Now for any of you that have been to Israel, I don't know whether you've ever seen the news agents, you know. Rory, you used to run a news agency, right? Do you have a news agency? Do you set up a news agency in Israel? You know what I mean? I can't see you running a news agency up in Israel for some reason. He's out in the middle of nowhere. This poor bloke, he didn't see the tender because he didn't access to the paper. So this incredibly naive bureaucrat in Canberra turns around and he says, well, he didn't put in a tender. And so when we made it known to him, and I said, the first question I asked him is, have you ever been into Israel? He said, well, no. I said, well, there's your problem. So now you have a situation where you've got a frustrated landowner, and it's got out of hand now to a certain extent because Cons Rock is also covered off now as well. So they're starting to see the track as more than just the track that was set up all those years ago, but an extra breadwinner. We can actually make more money out of this here and there and all that. So by the time you finish the end of it, you got security issues around carrying cash and all that kind of thing too. So this year, I created what was called the Kokoda Track Operators Association. And so thankfully, I got about 70% of the volume across the track on board. So we now have all the track operators on the one side, and most of them are really good. Most of them are great people. They're dedicated to the track. They go the extra yards. They invest in education. This year alone, just recently, for example, Vesselago, we invested in 65 kids so they could continue with their education. 22 orphans, it goes on and on and on. There's so much to this stuff that nobody sees. And a lot of the other operators are like that as well. They will go the extra yard, but unfortunately every now and again you get a few bad apples that come into the market, don't understand it, etc. And so that's the reason why these operations are very important to the Kokoda Track Operators Association. But the good news is that it's all moving in the right direction. And even better again, the local people on the track, of course, are probably better looked after now than ever. I remember when I went up there first, one of the hardest things was that it was growing at a slow rate. The history was starting to get a bit of traction. People were starting to understand, oh yeah, this Kokoda thing, this will happen to the diggers and da-da-da-da. And then it got to a point where people were savvy. They became really savvy around the internet, and they started creating all these beautiful websites that said, come at me, I can do the same as him or her. And it became a volume market. But what we were saying at the time has proved to be true. That by increasing the volume, increases the amount of money available to these people, but what it's done is, it's broken the social fabric. Because these kids then went away to Paul Moresby, had a pocket full of money like they've never had before, came back to their elders in Kokoda and said, don't need to live with you, I don't need to live under your laws anymore, I'm going to create my own one. And that's what happened. So the social fabric of society started to break down. And we warned them about this time and time again, but they didn't care. So, needless to say, we started to pick up the pieces on that, and we're constantly doing that. We're always dealing with politics, always dealing with balancing things, and it's always a moving target. You know, somebody else gets moved, somebody else has a better idea, and it's incredible. It can be highly frustrating, but the thing I learned, and I learned it from Stan in particular, is the integrity. The integrity is the most important thing in the track. It's not our story. We're merely storytellers. It's not our story, it's their story. It's their story from 1942, and they were the ones who created it. And when you look at why they were up there, and their beliefs, and the fact is that they were up there because they believed Australia was going to be invaded. They believed in their heart and soul. But when you talk to them, one of the most common replies that I've got for many years is that, well, even though you're sitting out there in the foxholes at night, 1942 is the highest rainfall ever recorded in Papua New Guinea, as we're sitting out there, you know, and on a bit of a cigarette, they always knew, or they always believed that their backs were covered. You know, they always believed their backs were covered, my mates would never let me down. And that whole word mateship comes up time and time and time again. And it's the legacy they've created, you know, and it's our duty as the next generations coming through to protect that legacy, you know. And this is your history. It's absolutely your history. And as I say to everybody who walks the track with me, you know, hey, you've heard the history now, and it's quite emotional. And I've got to be honest with you, when I'm presenting, every now and again that F word comes out as well. I don't know why, but it does. And that's the intensity, and that's the passion behind the history. But they take that history, and then they go home, and then they research it, and they take it further. And they might even, you know, they'll volunteer at local Rotary clubs, continue with the history, continue to speak, sales meetings, use the history motivationally. It goes on and on and on, or sell clubs, and they get the chance to speak, I'll use the history. And that's the power of this stuff, you know, it's the power, it never stops. It never stops, it keeps going. And that's why, like, when you hear people talking about, hey, I walked the Kokoda Track, the people who walk the Kokoda Track, not purely just the box ticket, well, they don't get anything out of it, they don't get anything from it. You know, the history is where it's at. I get a lot of people nowadays coming to me, you know, 56, 57 years of age, saying, Aidan, can you bring me up and show me where my dad fought? My dad was with the 2nd 25th, you know? And so we take them up there into their areas, so it could be the 2nd 14th Battalion, or the 2nd 16th, or the 2nd 27th, or the 2nd 4th, 2nd 2nd, or whatever it is. Bottom line is that we take them up into those areas, and we show them, and we show the foxholes, and we do the research, and we create it, and we show, well, this is where he was. And they get to stand in those areas. And then they suddenly realise, and they get to understand, well, my father came back from the war. There was no such thing. He was diagnosed PTSD in those days. But what he did do was he hit the bottle. And now I understand why. And now I understand that it wasn't my fault. It was his dealings with the demons that he experienced on the track. And there's a huge clearing. It's like a catharsis to a lot of people in search of why my father was the way he was, you know. And they're the victims of war. I had Kingsbury's family up on the track, you know. And this day, that next generation, they still haven't gotten over it. It's unbelievable how it goes on for the next generation, 2 generations. I see this all the time, you know, sons, daughters of diggers. They don't get over it. It takes a long time. They're innocent victims of war. It goes on and on and on. And that's what this stuff is all about, you know. It's giving people an opportunity to find what it means to them. And it is about following in the footsteps of those who come before, you know. I've got a movie that kind of demonstrates. Is that what they play? Yeah.